2 nights ago, I asked my best friend to marry me, and she said yes. Now, I don't say this to brag, and I don't say this to make her go bright red sitting there, but I said it because just after she said yes, something occurred to me that was really relevant to what I came here to talk about today. I was on the flight here from Sydney yesterday, and I had this nagging sensation that something wasn't quite right. And that's not the thing you want to be feeling the day after you've proposed to the love of your life. I sat there and dug into it, and it wasn't about certainty about the proposal. It turned out I was having this nasty, nagging little idea that I was going to be judged foolishly because, or judged as foolish because I proposed to someone I haven't known for a full year. Because somewhere in my crazy man brain, I'd associated that you need to know someone for a year before you propose. So I laughed. That was just, love doesn't have a timeline. That was very interesting, and I kind of laughed, but I didn't lose the lesson because that certainty is what I came here to talk about today. Our identities as human beings are built on our understanding of where we sit in the world, our morals, the way that we live our lives, our communities. And it's a formative belief that actually helps us get through the day. And our certainty, and I'm hoping that's not my phone, is something that we actually need to actually integrate with the world. We have a problem these days where the world's starting to come together very, very small, and worlds are overlapping and different belief systems are coming head to head. I think it's because we have 2 different types of morality in the world, and this is what I've learned over the past few years. We have a shared understanding of objective truths, like don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal, don't kill. That makes sense in every community, in every part of life. But then we have this subjective morality where I might have a belief that's a little bit different from you, and then we have a bit of trouble at times actually working with people who differ from us. And it's because our identities are formed in such a manner that I believe what I know to be true, so that's right. If you differ, that's wrong. And as Brené Brown says, we tend to bento box stuff. And we say things are good and bad, right and wrong. And that doesn't work for us because it actually stops us from dealing with other people who have different perspectives in life. Now I know this firsthand because I spent the 90s as a combat engineer in the Australian Army. And when you're a soldier, people look at you very differently and they will treat you differently. Now since I was this big, I wanted to be in uniform. And I remember in year 10 at school, a teacher asked me to write down 5 things I knew to be true. The 3rd thing I wrote down was, I believe that giving my life in service of country or those I love is a good thing. Now I came from a family where my mum was active in the community, and she showed us by example that you can have an impact, just choose carefully. So when the teacher put a red X through that page, I didn't worry about it for a moment. A year later, I was a combat engineer. Now, if you haven't been in uniform or you don't know people in uniform, it's a world within a world, and you have to buy in 100%. It's a world of certainty, because when you sign on the dotted line to say, train me to be ready to do the worst thing for the best reasons, you need to be certain, because you're risking life and limb. So you're in an environment where it's basically a rugby team with rocket launchers. It's fantastic. I thought it was every boy's dream. And I was there for almost 10 years of my life, and I loved it. And to this day, I still believe there's a role for soldiers, which is damn scary in a way. And I didn't mind over the years people calling me names at times, and even the few years after I left the military and I was a civilian walking around and people would just kind of look at you a bit strange when you said, yeah, I spent the first decade of my life in uniform. In 2010, my mind kind of changed a bit because I was sitting in a bar with a bunch of guys who were really nice operators who just got back from Afghanistan. And we were talking about an operation they'd been involved in where lots of lives had been lost. A guy walked across to our table, slammed down a beer and said, you guys are cavemen. You're yesterday's heroes. We don't need soldiers anymore. There's no good reason to kill. He stormed off and we had a conversation about that. They let it go and I thought it was rude because I'm a civilian now. We don't talk to each other like that. And one of the boys said he felt sorry for the Taliban in the firefight because they were guys just like us, but we were better trained and better equipped. He knew it was just another man like him standing up for what he believed in. And we started talking around the idea of state-sanctioned execution. We were soldiers being put on the front line to do these things on behalf of our government. We were sanctioned and we were certain. So what else around the world was there that kind of certainty? So we started thinking about this and we made a list. And we got to about 25 different things around the world. And having questions, I went home and did what we all do. I went home, jumped on Google. First thing I read, United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime report from 2013 that said 437,000 people died in 2012 as a result of intentional violence and homicide. That's state execution, that's euthanasia, that's soldiers at war, terrorism, honour killings, the list goes on. And I was fascinated, I have to admit. And it's gallows humour, but soldiers understand it. I wanted to meet these killers to see if they were like us. Did they have the same rationale? Were they killers, or was there something else I was missing? So I made a list and I started interviewing people. The first person I met was Australia's leading campaigner on euthanasia law reform, because we led the world in the mid-90s. We had the laws that actually gave people the right to apply to be medically euthanized at their own request by a medical professional. I thought the guy who did this, the first man in the world to legally do this, was a murderer when I sat down with him, and he talked me through it. It was interesting in the sense he talked about the guy's pain, he was suffering, his family was suffering, and then the guy's delight to actually have won this vote to die with dignity. And it made sense, because my grandfather, who was my only positive role model when I was young, had been relegated to a wheelchair for the remainder of his days. And if he'd asked me, and he was suffering, to end his suffering, what would I have done? Over the following years, there was hundreds of conversations, some really dark conversations and some wonderful ones, but I'll talk about two. The first one was a guy exactly the same age as me. We had birthdays 2 days apart, who at the age of 14 shot another guy in the chest to join a gang on the rough streets of LA and then spent a life sentence. We were chatting and he told me his story, and in his words he said, I had an arsehole father who used to drink every day and beat me up. And I went, I had the same arsehole father, but I had the mum who said, there's a roof over your head and there's food in the fridge. And we talked and I understood the human behind the label of killer, and he was going to have to spend the rest of his life moving past that. And then the next conversation was the conversation I hope I never have again. It was with a lady called Ma, and she'd moved to Australia a few years before I sat down with her, and I'd only just learned about infanticide. I didn't even know it existed until I sat down with her. And she said to me, she was so excited when she first learnt she was pregnant, and she was so excited in the hospital the day the baby was coming. And then when the baby came out, the father looked at the baby, saw it was a girl, and did that. And the nurse picked up the baby, carried it out of the room, and put it in a room to die. It's a result of the one-child policy where China's trying to restrict population growth, and they don't value girls as much as guys because guys can have estate passed on to them, and that helps parents have a retirement plan. When I walked into that room, I thought she was vile. I was actually sick to my stomach. And as I sat there in tears with her translator telling me the story, she asked me why I was sad. I said, I'm sad because I'd be horrified if I wasn't sad, but I'm sad because that's a deep... Can you imagine being put in that spot? The mother's in the room. I mean, it's just a sickening thought. 100 million girls are missing in China over the past 40 years as a result of this policy. And what I realised, I went looking for killers, and I found them. I found heaps and heaps of killers, and I met some horrible people, and I met lots and lots of beautiful people, though. This is a tiny percentage of society who have done the worst thing in a lot of cases for the best reasons, with the right kind of rationale. But what I learned is that there was a shared humanity there, and there was a lot behind the label of killer. And it was Soren Kierkegaard's words of, once you label me, you negate me, that really made sense to me then. And I learned 4 things that can guide us in the way that we live in the world and can deal with conflict. The first is that we need to embrace the grey. There's 7 billion people on this planet who are dead certain about their beliefs. If we're going to try and dig our heels in and argue with all of them, it's a fool's errand. Embracing the grey gives us room to move. I think with that as well too, we need to look at the labels we're actually throwing on people, because that says more about us than them. Because we're more than the labels. I'm a soldier, I've been called a baby killer. I'm a killer because a past partner has been through an abortion. I have every label under the sun you can append to me, and I've been called every name, but I'm much more than that, as are all of us. I think the way that we move forward as human beings to move away from who's right to what's right and having conversations is by adopting an attitude of appreciative inquiry, which means we sit down, we have courageous conversations where you hear another human being and you hear their story, and we respect their story as equal as our own. And that's really important. And it's not easy to do. And it doesn't mean we have to take on their beliefs, but we have to hear them. And I think the last thing that I actually really learnt, which I thought was really interesting, was I'm a highly verbal person amongst my friends, and I get called a lot of names. Nice names mostly. And I think what's interesting is that I learnt that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. And if we use them in that ratio, we can all change the world. Thank you.